Thanks. So you've seen me over the last 2 days quite often here, and I also do something else besides Q&As. I also try to bring Checkmk as a product further, and for that, my main responsibility is to talk to users to understand what are your problems, what jobs do you try to solve, and how we can help as Checkmk to make your life easier. And yeah, that's our plans. And what are we doing for that in the next Checkmk release? That's the topic of my talk. And before we actually talk about the Checkmk 2.3 roadmap, I want to go a little bit behind the scenes, because they have been wishes for more transparency as to the process by which we develop and select features for the roadmap. So how do we actually do that? There are many origins of the Checkmk roadmap. There are many sources. And we start by gathering information. For example, here at the Checkmk Conference, that's where we get a very good prioritized list. What are really, if you have to weigh things, what are the really important topics for you? We have the feature portal, which is a long list. It's an idea pool where we can just basically look and say, there's a topic which we think makes sense, and let's pick up things from there and use them as ideas. Then we have many large customers, and with them we have discussions, conversations, because they have very special requirements, and we talk to them and try to incorporate them as well. We have also new users, because here, most of you, I guess all of you are Checkmk users, but there's also the world of people who are not using Checkmk yet. And getting the input from what they need, we get from our sales and marketing teams. Then we also need to do product maintenance, and we need to do security. And so we actually get quite a lot of internal requirements from our engineering teams, what we have to do there. So that's also an input source for us. And then we have these strategic priorities. And they are mostly targeted at expanding the product. And strategic priorities are things which are not yet part of the daily business of an IT admin, but eventually they will become. And we structure all this input and discuss it then for the roadmap of the next version. For example, for Checkmk 2.3, we did it a couple of months before the release of Checkmk 2.2. So in March, we actually knew that we will release Checkmk around May, June. So we started in March the process for the Checkmk 2.3 roadmap. We discussed it quite long, and then get to a result. We refined it over the time, in a quarterly fashion, because we're working internally in Scrum, so we need to make adaptations all the time. And in the end, then we hopefully release it, Checkmk 2.3, and the entire circle repeats. And that happens roughly every year for us. So we basically plan 1 year ahead of what we want to do. There's always room to wiggle around stuff, but that's roughly our planning scope. So I just talked about the strategic priorities. And where do they come from? And as Jan mentioned, I was a former consultant, so I really like things like that. And we as the developers of Checkmk, we have to consider how in the long term the IT will evolve. And I think this is the Gartner hype cycle is a pretty good illustration of how technologies go throughout their lifetime, how they develop regarding visibility. And in the beginning, we basically get into like everyone hypes these things. Yeah, you get basically this peak of inflated expectations where the technology is a solution for everything, where it's hyped by no end. Everyone is talking about it. It's actually no one has used it yet, but it's the next big thing. Yeah, so we really have these inflated expectations. Then, as soon as people start to implement these products and solutions, they realize it's probably not the solution to everything. It has a lot of problems, and they come into this trough of disillusionment. And after that, it actually picks up again. We go via the slope of enlightenment, where we learn, okay, this is how we have to improve such technologies, to the plateau of productivity, where things really go into mainstream. And for us, the question is, when do we actually look at technologies? Yeah? And we cannot wait as a monitoring solution to wait until things are in mainstream because you already need a solution by then. So we have to start much earlier when these technologies are still very hip and when there are still a lot of questions around them, if they actually become viable or not. And so we basically start by looking a little bit earlier in the cycle. Yeah? Because we need to build these solutions for future challenges so that you as a user, once the solution becomes mainstream, have the solution to monitor it. And we did in Checkmk 1.6, we did quite a lot of these things, for example. Like we did the Docker image, we did the cloud monitoring, the Docker monitoring, we did the labels, the dynamic configuration. These were all introduced in Checkmk 1.6. And now we see really a lot of demand for these things. Like now they have got much more bigger. Back then it was like, why do we do that? Let's take an example, the cloud monitoring. In 2018, we asked at the conference, what are the important topics for you? And we had these stickers as we have today, and 5% of all votes ended up for cloud monitoring. The Checkmk documentation itself had more votes than cloud monitoring. And now, cloud is something which has become much more reality for many more people. And with our positioning for hybrid cloud monitoring or for hybrid IT monitoring, we wouldn't be able to do that now if we wouldn't have started the journey back then. So sometimes this means we have to set a course, even though current users consider other things to be more important. And so overall, we have to do hard choices. And we have to balance between new features, which can come from strategic priorities, feature improvements, and then platform improvements, which are under the hood of Checkmk. And we prioritize these features by relevance, by effort, for all users, but also for the large users. So let's go from theory to practice. How did we actually do that prioritization for Checkmk 2.3? We first take a look at the strategic roadmap. And while we would love to do all of these things, we cannot. Yeah? So there are big topics like application performance management in these big buckets of strategic topics. We selected 2 of them. I will talk later about them. And they basically make part of the roadmap then up. And then we have a really big source of, or big list of new features and improvements. And if you look at all of them, we have more than 500 ideas of things which we could implement. Yeah? So we first boiled it down to a manageable list for us, 150 ideas. We discuss all these 150 ideas. And then there are some must-dos. For example, the Checkmk appliance runs under Debian 10 at the moment. Debian 10 is end of life next year. So we need to solve that problem. So it's a must-do thing. So we cannot not do it. There are 15 of these things which are must-do for us. And then the rest of the capacity we have until Checkmk 2.3, we can roughly plan it because we typically do yearly releases. We fill it up. So that leaves us in the end with 50 new features improvements and 2 strategic priorities which we do. And I'm going to now share you what these are. And let's start with the improvements to the current editions. A key topic for us is to improve the core features of Checkmk. And we want to make the features you're working with on a daily basis more powerful. We want to make it a joy to work with Checkmk. And the main driver for improvements here is your feedback via the feature portal and the user experience research Tanya is doing. And labels, we introduced them Checkmk 1.6 or 2.0, I'm actually not sure when exactly. And they have received high praise. And we have seen so many talks in the morning about that, which confirms how relevant they have become. Yeah? And we have heard you that we have to make them more powerful. And we selected therefore 2 elements from the feature portal, or 2 requests from the feature portal, which fit that theme quite well. The first is supporting more flexible label condition and rules. And secondly, how we handle labels in the service discovery. And I think this is quite just to showcase what are we actually talking about. When you have the conditions where you right now have the labels which are like that, you can only do it with an AND combination. This dialog, I mean, makes sense. We already have designed it to implement it there as well. And that's what we want to implement for Checkmk 2.3 for that part, so that you have more powerful options to work with labels and rules. The other pain point around labels is that they are handled by the service discovery. And labels can be very dynamic. And they are much more volatile than services. But we use kind of the same mechanisms as for the service discovery. And the feature request in the portal basically says, can we have another option in here which only handles labels? Because, as you can see, there is none which only would handle labels. But we actually want to take the opportunity to rethink how we handle labels in general. Because why would you have to discover labels in the first place? It might make sense, but it might actually also not make sense. So this is something which we will have to answer on the route to Checkmk 2.3. What is the best way how to actually handle labels? Is how we have done it in the past really the right way? Or shall we actually adopt a different methodology? And that's on the plan for Checkmk 2.3 to solve that problem. So now we have more powerful options how to work with labels. We will try to make the life better we will try to make the life better when working with labels. But for that to work, you obviously need much more labels. And we had this feature request from Mike, add automatic label depending on Linux distribution. And we want to make that possible, but we want to make that a lot more powerful. We basically, of course, you will not have all these things for every Linux, for every distribution, or for every operating system, but actually creating many more labels which describe the operating system which are running on the servers you're monitoring. And we don't only want to do that for Linux, we will try to make that possible for every operating system, however that is possible then, yeah? And for this feature request, which is mostly relevant for managed service providers, the solution is actually not to add further conditions to the rules to make even the condition list even longer, but labels. Because we already have the site label, so basically what we are going to do is adding a customer label as well, so that you can use that in rule conditions. As the next theme for improvements to the Checkmk core features, we selected an area which monitoring admins are coming very often in contact with. The setup of Checkmk, specifically folders. And we looked through the feature portal and looked what are all the ideas and recommendations and topics around folders, and used that as a source of inspiration for us. And instead of going through them, I will just illustrate them, because then you will realize what all the problems are with folders in Checkmk. The first thing, if you use this filter up there, it will not filter folders, but only hosts. Then, if you have long folder names, which can happen if you import them or automatically set them, they're cut off. Then, if you look at the sorting here, A comes after capital F, which can confuse users quite easily. And then, I mean, this is the quite obvious thing, if you have more than 20 folders or whatever, it will become quite hard to use the entire view of the host setup. And while this is something which is more relevant, of course, for users who have a lot of folders, it's something which we are seeing more and more. It also plays along the lines that we want a more consistent and intuitive user interface. There were a couple other highly voted feature requests who do not belong to a theme, but we still picked them because we believe they make quite a lot of sense. The first one is fake check results should create hard state test notifications, add agent updater registration role, and show user currently activating changes. And I think the latter two are quite self-explanatory. The first one needs a little bit more context. So let's start by trying to understand how notifications are actually triggered. Who of you knows the hard state? Oh, good. There's a rule which defines what this hard state is. And it's called the maximum number of check attempts for service or host. And only a so-called hard state can trigger notifications. And by default, after one check cycle in a problem state, that's a hard state. But you can adapt that to a higher number. And only then it's considered as being hard. If you want to test notifications, if they actually work, for example, does my Linux server team get the alerts for the Linux servers? You want to try, does it actually work? So there's this command called fake check results. And you can trigger test notifications with that and change the state. And that works great if you have the default setting. Because in the default setting, after one fake check result, it will go, when you say, for example, quit, it will go into the hard state and trigger notification. But in reality, most users have configured the rule to deal with flaky notifications. Let's say it requires 3 check cycles to be in critical, and only then it alerts. And then the first 2 times, it's in a soft state, and then the third time it's in a hard state. And only the hard state will trigger the notification. So what you have to do is you have to click the command 3 times. But if you're not fast enough, and a normal check comes, then you go again into the OK state, which is a hard state, and you have to try again. And that's obviously a pain. And what we want to solve is how can users reliably test notifications without having to click a lot in the user interface. And one solution could be obviously to trigger the hard state immediately via fake check results. But I'd say let's see what we come up with a solution, because we understand the problem. And there are many ways how we can solve it, and we will try to look into what is the best way to solve it for 2.3. Another popular feature request, which we want to tackle in 2.3, is the top 10 host dashlet, because it can make Checkmk much more powerful in many ways. And while it sounds rather singular, its implementation has far-reaching implications. And you might wonder, isn't that already possible? Can't you already do sorted things? Can't you already sort, for example, for parameters in a list? And why do we actually need that? And so let's look a little bit into the limitations which the views and the dashlets have. And the first thing is the ranking options. They don't work for all kind of metrics. You can't do pre-sorting. If you have, for example, a joint column, you can't use a joint column and pre-sort that. So you have to go into the user interface when the view loads, and then you can click and it starts to sort. Then, for dashlets, there is no sorting at all possible. So, and lastly, and that's the most fundamental problem, it doesn't work in larger distributed setups. And you might actually wonder why, and why is it so complicated to solve that problem? And when you think about the Checkmk UI, it acts like a distributed database. It accesses the data from all the remote sites. And while that is a clear design strength of Checkmk, because we have the data distributed among all remote sites, so it's quite scalable and reliable, for that use case, it's quite a pain for us. Yeah? For example, if you want to get the Tom, think of it like if you can think of it like querying data from a database. Yeah, think what you get back are result rows. And if you have a remote site, and on each of the remote sites you get 3 database rows as the result, then you aggregate that in the central UI and you get 12 rows, and that's very easily sortable. The UI can handle that, the backend can handle that. There's no problem with that. But that's rarely the case, because the typical case is that we have environments where we are talking about 10,000s of results per site. And there, as long as you don't sort it, you're fine, because the UI can show you the stuff, but it shows you only the first 1,000 results. If you then disable that, you get the first 5,000 results, and that's when your browser will start to run into issues, because there's only so much HTML data a browser can handle. But that's not the only limit. There's also a limit in the backend, because the backend does the sorting, and that sorting in the backend corresponds to the limits in the UI. And so there are only so many results queried from the remote sites as necessary to show in the user interface. And so, for example, when we have the limit of 1,000, it will request 1,000 results per site. And if the first site already returned you 1,000 results, you will see these first 1,000 results and not the other ones. And you can obviously do sorting on that, but it's an incomplete picture. So there's one option how to solve that. We could actually implement sorting that we only get the first top 10 results per site or something like that. That would be one of the things. Live Status doesn't have this sorted feature at the moment. So as you can see, this top 10 UI dashlet is not just a very simple UI request. It's a more fundamental change to Checkmk, and we plan to start that with 2.3. Because this will enable then dashboards which work for any kind of infrastructure. If you have 1,000 hosts, if you have 10,000 hosts, doesn't matter. With such a dashlet and with such a feature within Live Status, we can actually deal with all these things. So it's a very fundamental problem which we have to tackle, and we will start doing that, and we'll hopefully already be able to implement some of the use cases in 2.3, but it's something which will take us on a little bit of a longer journey. The next feature you have seen already yesterday in the talk by Finanzinformatik and Iteratio. It's the visualization in network topology. And a couple of versions ago, we introduced a new visualization framework for the business intelligence, for the network topology, and we are now building on this development, and we made it much more powerful. And I mean, you can now see that how hosts are connected. You can also see which interfaces are then talking to each other, so the visualization can show all these things now. And if you want more detail, you can see that. You can see the details on the hosts. You can see them on the services. That's something which already exists, but it just showcases how much a network topology can already do and where we have started to build on. You can easily adapt them to however you need. You can save the layouts. And we have, therefore, quite an intuitive and powerful interface with that. You just need the data. And our focus has been to provide this visualization layer. Yeah? The data can come from different sources. CDP, where we have heard it's quite a good data quality. LLDP, which is a little bit more for pain. And then you can obviously also use other sources. And what you have to provide as a user is the first part. Yeah? What is the topology? You have to basically fill a topology.json file, and then this is defined by us what has to be in there. And once that is there, we can actually use that to visualize that. And our focus was the latter part, because that's something we can do. The first part has a lot of issues around data cleaning, which is responsibility of you, because it's very hard for us to kind of do it. Like maybe something which we'll do in the future for CDP, because there it's much more easy to do it. But for Checkmk 2.3, that's at least our focus is on the visualization pieces. And we will also backport that in an MKP to 2.2 if you already want to get your hands on that earlier. Let's jump to another topic now, user experience. As Tanya demonstrated yesterday already, we want to improve workflows. And for the acknowledgement of problems, we already have done that. And we have done the hard work with many iterations with users, and we have a solution at hand which we just have to implement. Another example for potential UX improvements are dialogues. In Checkmk 2.2, we already implemented that, for example, for the confirmation dialog for deleting rules. And in 2.3, we plan actually to roll all these things out further. The acknowledged problems workflow we have seen. The scheduled downtimes thing is something which is being also used very often. It's also quite unintuitive to use. That's the next thing we are going to start to tackle. Then on the dialogues, we'll actually rework all confirmation dialogues, all command dialogues, so that they actually make more sense, because they all look different, they all interact different. It's all like, yeah, it's something where we can improve on. And then there are also a lot of planned improvements to simple elements to make Checkmk as well there more intuitive to use. And at the core of a great user experience also lays performance, because it doesn't matter how nice and how good it feels to use the interface, if it's slow, that's not a great experience in the end. And performance becomes naturally a challenge in large environments. And more of these Checkmk setups which we are seeing are becoming very large. And while monitoring 1 or 2 million services on just 13 sites is already a feat, we actually have seen yesterday the example of Finanzinformatik who are monitoring 3 times as many services on the same number of sites, which is a couple of 100,000 of services per site, which is quite a lot. Yeah? But there are also setups which are even larger, which obviously then have to struggle with even more serious topics then. And I think this is probably the largest environment we have, 5.8 million services on 170 sites, and 128,000 hosts they're monitoring. And they are all centrally configured and viewed, so all the data comes together in a central viewing site. We have another extreme as well in the retail space with 5,000 Checkmk sites, 4 million services. And these super large environments, they need, and I think they also deserve a special treatment. And while there's, I think, likely no other tool which can handle such large systems at decent performance, we see the need for further improvements there, for common issues across these environments. And I have brought one example which works really well if you have not so many dashboards, not so many reports. The Add To button in almost every view loads all dashboards and reports in your site. And when you have just 10 or 20 of them, that's fine. If you have hundreds of them, you can imagine the impact that has on loading the page. And that happens even without having to click on Add To, it's always loaded into it. And while these improvements which we plan there, they're targeted at the large environments, they obviously have an impact on everyone, yeah? Because in the end, it will make it microseconds faster for everyone. And in the sum, if you do all these things, it will make Checkmk much more smoother. And for that, by the way, let's not even talk about usability if you have hundreds of reports or dashboards in there. I don't know how much you can scroll actually in there. So what are the improvements to the current editions which you plan? So that's basically improving the core features. We have seen for configuration, we are planning quite a lot of things for visualization, for workflows and actions, and for performance. The other big topics is updates. And we have heard that from especially users with more complex environments, with a lot of custom extensions. Custom extensions as being one of the strengths of Checkmk, but when you do an update, that can become one of the problems. And we want to make updates a breeze in the future. And for that, we have to tackle 3 topics. One, actually the extensions. The other topic are incompatible changes. And the third one are invalid configurations. And for extensions, I mean, extensions can be check plugins, can be agent plugins, can be inventory plugins, GUI plugins, graphs, performeters, and so on. And the issues, Moritz has talked about them yesterday already. And for some of the extensions, we just don't have a developer API. Without developer APIs, if we do internal code restructuring, we don't even know if we are impacting you. You don't know what we are doing, and that is not really reliable if you're an extension developer. So the solution is quite obvious, developer APIs, and that's what we are planning. And in Checkmk 2.0, we already introduced a new check API back then, which did a major part of it. And for Checkmk 2.3, we are planning the metric plugins API, which also includes performeters, the rule sets API, and special agent parameterization. And with that, there will be obviously one more time the pain. So for Checkmk 2.3, there will be incompatibilities coming along for that, because when we do this change, that's the same change as we did from 1.6 to 2.0. It's one more time that pain, but hopefully afterwards we get into a much nicer environment for everyone and much better situation. Another thing which can make updates an annoyance are incompatible changes. And out of the 1,524 works for Checkmk 2.2, 160 were incompatible. And these incompatible changes are changes requiring user knowledge, requiring interaction from you. Can be just a simple service rediscovery, but it could also be a manual adaptation of the configuration which you need to do. And Who of you is using Camp Loadmasters? Raise your hands. So I see 5 hands. And I think this maybe illustrates exactly the problem. A lot of these incompatible changes which we do are only relevant to a small set of users. And you still have to click through all of them. You get all these 160 incompatible changes which you need to acknowledge. And we recommend that you actually go through them. But I mean, what if most of them are not relevant to you? And the problem here is that the incompatible changes thing in the UI is not aware of your configuration. So the goal for us is that we only show the incompatible changes which are relevant to you, so that you at least don't have to go through all of them which are not relevant. So we need to read your configuration for that piece, and then we show the things which are relevant for you. But we don't want to stop there, because I mean, the underlying root cause, that's the thing which we have to address. And that's the incompatible changes themselves. And it's not just like there's one root cause for incompatible changes, there's actually really a lot. And what we have to do is we have to now understand and analyze where do all these incompatible changes come from, because there are hundreds of sources. And then we have to understand what are the biggest impact factors, and then we can start working on them. And for 2.3, what we at least plan is that we can implement already some of the quick wins. We will try to do as much as possible, but our goal is in the future to reduce the number of incompatible changes overall, so that ideally it becomes a manageable number again. Because I mean, as we further grow in size as a company, we get more and more developers in the future as well. There will be and we get more features. There will just be more incompatible changes, and this is not a situation which can be maintained for the future, neither for us nor for you. Another measure to improve the update experience is a so-called config validation layer. And for Checkmk to work, the configuration and runtime data needs to conform with our data model. And these data files, or these configuration files, they are on disk. So you can actually modify them. You can modify them yourselves. You can use automation tools for that. And this leads then to issues at runtime. And it's then very difficult to track where did it actually come from. And we saw a lot of these things in the support tickets for the REST API, because once people started to automate everything, the historic problems started to come basically wash up on front. Because we realized, okay, the actual underlying issue is a change in the configuration which is not supported anymore, which doesn't fit into our data model. And so what we want to do is that for 2.3, that during an update, CMK update config, which is running executed there, it's actually checking, are the configuration state files okay with our data model? And if they are not, then we alert you, these are the things which are not complying, and then it leads to an aborted update, and you can fix the things, so that you don't have these nasty surprises during runtime anymore. To sum it up, making updates a breeze. We plan to introduce developer APIs for the missing pieces, work on several projects around incompatible changes, and introduce a config validation layer. And monitoring, that's the bread and butter of Checkmk. And thus we will and are expanding it continuously. And this is best done in close collaboration with you. So how do we actually plan to extend the monitoring coverage? And in 2.2, we have already seen that a lot of the improvements for existing Check plugins came via code contributions. Because we are developers as a company. We know some of the monitoring devices, of course, but the knowledge actually lies within you, because you have the hardware, you have the software in your environments, you know what matters most. So we actually need your expertise, and this has worked quite well in the past. And I think one example is the Nutanix monitoring, which is already merged in for 2.3, which Andreas basically completely reworked. I think it was 19 commits, or it was a super big change which we merged. We made an exception from this. We only accept small stuff there, because we have established kind of a working relationship with Andreas now for these code contributions. And we also plan to work with another of the contributors you might know from the community, with Thomas, THLCMK, who has been writing a lot of extensions for network monitoring, who's a network expert. And our plan is to work with him either on improving the Cisco Meraki monitoring or building a monitoring for Cisco DNA Center. And lastly, Redfish as a big topic for server monitoring. Andreas already has built quite a lot of that around, and our goal is to work with him on mainlining his Redfish monitoring, which is a generic Redfish integration into Checkmk. Yeah. There are also other ways how we actually improve or extend our monitoring coverage. That's why commissioned projects. So what we still do is checks and agents development. That's something you can actually still request from us. It's something which solves immediate need of a customer. We do enhancements to existing checks. We do new checks. And then there are also, of course, the strategic developments. It has to fit our strategic priorities. There are a couple of things which we want to do. We want to actually add a couple of further checks for AWS and Azure monitoring. Not as many as we did for 2.2, but we actually want to add some more, and we especially want to rework some of the existing integrations, because for a scalable cloud monitoring, there are a lot of improvements which we have on top of our mind, which would make it much better. Then SUSE Rancher. While you can already monitor today, there are some smaller workarounds which you need to do. You can monitor Rancher, you can also monitor Tanzu. We don't officially support them yet, but our plan is that for 2.3 we do some of the minor adaptations which we need to do. And we already know quite well what we have to do, and that's on our radar for 2.3 that we also officially support it. But don't worry, if you want to use it, just look at all the posts in the forum where we have answered how you can monitor Rancher. Yeah. And as we are talking already about cloud monitoring, for the Managed Service Edition, I'm not sure if everyone is aware of the Managed Service Edition, but we have a dedicated product for managed service providers, which is tailored for monitoring customers' IT infrastructure. You have data segregation so that the config is only pushed to individual customers, not that the entire config is pushed to all customers. You have multi-customer management dashboards. And for a managed service provider, some of the features which we have in the Cloud Edition make quite a lot of sense. Yeah? The push mode is really helpful if you have segmented networks of your customers which you want to monitor centrally. The auto registration is obviously quite a nice feature, and these are things which we actually want to bring into the Checkmk Managed Service Edition for Checkmk 2.3. So, while Checkmk is becoming even more feature-rich, there are many external factors which we cannot control and require adaptations on our side, on our product. And we call that feature debt. And this year I want to share a couple of the examples which we have to tackle. That's actually some of these must-do things. And yeah, let's jump into them. NetApp has, for example, introduced a REST API which deprecates the interface which we have been using for a long time. So to be able to monitor NetApp in the future, we have to switch our entire monitoring to the new REST API of NetApp. Microsoft is getting rid of basic auth. It has actually already gotten rid of it. This impacts, for example, the checkmail checks, which now need to support OAuth 2. Then VBS is also getting slowly killed in the Windows world. So we have a couple of plugins which are using VBS in the Windows world. Foremost, the MS SQL plugin is one of the larger ones. So we plan to start replacing the entire VBS code which we have. And I hope that these examples already clarify the meaning of feature debt. We have to adapt Checkmk to these changing situations. But there's also more feature debt. Check HTTP, the monitoring plugins developer group already has replaced it with check curl, because check HTTP has a lot of shortcomings. So we have to now figure out, what do we want to do? Do we also want to go to check curl? Do we want to write our own check HTTP implementation? And we now have to evaluate what is the best option for that. And when we develop the Kubernetes monitoring, we actually promised you that we will always be compatible with the latest Kubernetes version. And that for us means we have to, because Kubernetes is changing quite a lot all the time. Unfortunately, last versions were quite stable. It means we always have to invest time into making sure it works for the latest releases. And what we have seen is that with the changes which we introduced in Checkmk 2.1, it becomes much more stable. We haven't actually had to do quite a lot in the recent newer Kubernetes versions. They actually worked always off the shelf. Only minor adaptations, minor additions which we had to do. And lastly, it's actually a bigger topic for us, is the end of life of Debian 10. We are using Debian 10 in the appliance, and we rely on OFS, I don't actually know how to pronounce it properly, as the union mount file system, and that doesn't exist anymore in Debian 11 or 12, and it was replaced by overlay FS. And so it's not just a OS update which we have to do, we also have to tackle underlying concepts there. We, of course, also plan several improvements under the hood to make Checkmk technically ready for the future. That are the platform improvements. And among them are several initiatives for a cleaner software architecture. We have a long-term project to improve maintainability, and that's basically introducing a new UI framework. Quality and security are two topics which are always top of our mind, and Lars already basically went into details what we are doing there yesterday in his talk, and so I will not go into detail in there. So these are the improvements which we plan for Checkmk. So, but what are the two strategic priorities which I mentioned in the beginning? I mean, it's no surprise because Jan already mentioned it yesterday, and if you have listened to what we are doing somewhere, you have seen that already, so there's no surprise in there. And the first one is around how we actually deploy Checkmk, or how you can deploy Checkmk. And Checkmk is currently, I think, one of the best tools when it comes to hybrid IT monitoring. We are really, I think, best in class when it comes to on-premises infrastructure monitoring. And for the cloud-native workloads, we actually have quite good solutions nowadays as well. But Checkmk you can only have as a self-deployed solution. And one of our main strategic initiatives is to build a software as a service product. And why is this relevant at all? Many customers we are seeing have a cloud-first strategy nowadays. And when they come to us, they ask us, do you have a SaaS solution? And so we actually need to build a solution for them because that becomes more and more. It was like a couple of years ago, we didn't hear that at all, but especially in the US, where we opened an office last year, we see that really like quite a lot in demand. And we understand that many of you want to control the entire process, which makes sense, and with OMD we have a great tool to do so. So if you use OMD, a lot of the pain around working with a software we have lifted already. But some of customers, they are cloud-first customers, and they want to focus only on the monitoring. And this is what we want to enable for them. And keep in mind, what we don't want to build is a managed monitoring service. Our goal is to provide a platform so that you can do the monitoring, but you don't have to worry about the platform. You don't have to worry about backups, performance, availability, and so on. So it's not just a new product. I think it will make Checkmk much better, and we are already seeing that. Because we have to monitor the monitoring as part of that. And we have to improve our own monitoring of Checkmk. And one of the examples are the disk usage checks, which we already introduced, which came because we needed it for our SaaS project. Then we are now building a product which has to work at scale. That also means we have to tackle many more challenges, which are challenges which you as Checkmk users have to tackle already now. Yeah? And that means we have to improve monitoring for technologies at scale. And last but not least, a SaaS product requires everything to be automated. You can't do manual stuff there. And that means we have to make sure that the operations of Checkmk are as smooth as possible, that there's fewest interruptions as possible, that the updates are really smooth, and these things we will have as a pain ourselves, and having it as a pain ourselves will make us open our eyes much more to your pain, and hopefully help together that we solve all these issues around Checkmk operations. So the goal is actually to also improve Checkmk operations for everyone. If you're interested, you can sign up for the SaaS beta already. This is the link if you want to, if you're interested. We're currently building it, and if you want to have a sneak peek at it, sign up for that. When it comes to application monitoring, we believe that the best method for our user base is synthetic monitoring. Because it really complements the inner view, which Checkmk can provide, with the external views from users. And when we thought about application monitoring, you could always, of course, also do tracing. You could also do all different things around metrics and logs. But when we think about our user base, I think the synthetic monitoring really complements what we want to do and what we need to do. And if you look at the Checkmk exchange, RobotMK is the most downloaded package which we see there. So Simon already just spoke about it, so I will keep myself brief. Our goal is to monitor externally, basically doing robot tests. Simon talked about it already, so that we get the perspective from the user. And for 2.3, we will focus on the automation of the middle piece to make that really a smooth process. Yeah? So the test node management, the test execution and scheduling. And when we have solved these biggest pain points, you can with that feature set, you can also already do pretty good synthetic monitoring. But there are two further pain points. One is around test development, and the other one is around the insights. Because in the end, synthetic monitoring is something which is top of mind also for every application manager. Because this is really the important piece. Yeah? If your application doesn't work, it's not so great. And seeing dashboards around that, seeing insights why it doesn't work. I think one of the examples which I heard from one of our pilot customers, which we talked about, that was with the APM tool, they were actually not able to see a performance degradation of the application. So the time it took for the test to finish started to extend over time. But with the way how they implemented dashboards, with the existing RobotMK integration, they were actually able to see, there is a performance degradation happening over a long period of time. And with that, they actually used that as a look, when did it actually start, went into the APM tool, started tracing, and found out, that's where the problem is. So it actually really complements the entire view of that. And it actually gives you insights which other tools can't provide. So this is the plan for Checkmk 2.3. We have many improvements planned for the existing editions, but we also plan to work on new topics. And to end this part, I want to share with you how we think about the focus on the Checkmk 2.3 release. And our focus from a time investment perspective are the core features and making updates a breeze. Because this is what we have heard over the last year, one of also the biggest topics for you. It's like working with Checkmk really a lot of joy again. And platform improvements are something which we also rank quite high, because this will make Checkmk under the hood a much better product in the future, and will help us to develop features faster, with more quality and more stability. To kickstart the new products, we also have to invest some time in them, of course, but overall, what we believe is that making the existing product better is more important. So that's how we try to balance the effort we spend on things. And I'm actually quite happy that if you look into where do these things come from, almost all is driven by users. And that's something which is very important to me, because in the end, we are building the product for you guys. So that was the Checkmk 2.3 roadmap. Let's now talk about some other topics as well. And one of the things is the feature portal. We introduced it exactly 1 year ago, in June 2022, I think. And since then, we have had quite a lot of suggestions. I think among the platform which we're using, we are the product with the most number of suggestions. Every day we get a new one. And we have implemented some of them, but you can see there's quite a discrepancy between all the ideas and what we can actually also do, and what we have already done. So let's reflect a little bit what was the purpose of the portal from our perspective. Yeah? And before, we had many closed input channels. And that was, on the one hand side, difficult for us, because we had to keep track of this, and this. And we also heard the wish from you for more transparency. And we now actually have a place with the features.checkmk.com where everybody can see what are the ideas of others. We want to understand the relevance of features. Is that something relevant only for one person, or does it impact really a big group? And then I think this is important. The feature portal is for us, that's how we perceive it for the moment, an input source. I mean, you have seen in the beginning we have a lot of different sources, and we need to consider them when we create the roadmap. And the purpose of the feature portal is for us to have an idea pool so that we can complement the themes which we have in the roadmap with that. So that what we actually do there, you have seen the first part of the talk, really addresses needs of users. And we have, for example, here at the conference, the voting in the back, which is a prioritized list. You only have a selected number of options and a selected number of votes, and that is a very different way how prioritization can be done. And the feature portal was for us more the idea pool. But there's actually another reason why we see the feature portal rather as a prioritized input source and not something which dictates the roadmap, and that's basically gaming the system. And there are attempts, and we expected them, and that's, I think, fine. We just need to consider them in our decision-making process. And here's an example of a feature request with more than 80 votes, and I anonymized it because we don't want to shame anyone here. And we have seen that 30% of the votes for this individual feature request came from the same IP pool, which is a very small town somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And another 30% were roughly votes from 2 companies. We were able to, it was not very difficult to triangulate that. And while we typically see that the number of anonymous votes versus registered votes is 50%, for that individual feature request, we had 80% of the votes, which were anonymous, which is quite an outlier. And that brings me basically to the learnings we had and the feedback which we received regarding the feature portal. Our initial goal was to have a really low hurdle for involvement because we want to get as much diverse input as possible. But we now actually have to choose between this low hurdle for high involvement versus individuals gaming the system. The feedback which we have heard from some of you was it's actually not fair because anonymous users have the same weight as, for example, a paying customer. So why are the votes of an Enterprise Edition user not weighted higher than the one of a Raw Edition user, was the feedback which we heard. And regarding usability, there are so many topics, and we understand that's impossible to go through all these 750 feature requests and vote on them. But this also leads, this sheer amount of number, leads to a graveyard potential, something which we actually also don't want. And then there's the self-reinforced voting. So you can see the ones on the first page, they just drag up more and more votes. And the ones on later pages, they basically don't get any votes at all. Regarding communication, the feedback which you got, too few updates, too little transparency on the decision process. And that basically brings me to the big question. What is the purpose of the feature portal? Do we want for users to search for a feature? If it doesn't exist, add it or vote on it? Basically like GitHub issues? Or do we want to have a priority list that there's a limited number of features, limited number of votes, and you can really prioritize, and we really know this is something which really matters. But this has a lot of implications. This means we have to keep the list really short. We have to reject almost everything which comes in. We need to have basically named users logged into that. It has quite a lot of follow-ups. So what we actually want to learn from you, we actually want to understand what are your expectations. Because when we introduced it, we didn't ask that from you. And now, 1 year later, I think we have now a lot of users here, and we already had a discussion in a smaller circle once before. For us, it would be very important to understand on the feedback walls, which are there in the back, we actually added a new feature wall there, a feedback wall, where you don't have to use your stickers, you can just use pins to vote on there. And this will help us make an informed decision on it, on how to proceed with the feature portal, because when we get your expectations, we can match them with what we can do, and hopefully get to a feature portal which is stable for the future. I will close my talk with how we plan to communicate the roadmap in the future. At this year's conference, I've gone into much more detail than in the previous years. And we have been much more specific on what we actually want to do. And we have started to put a detailed roadmap also on the website. And that's also now structured by releases. And we will do regular updates on the website. We will also try to do regular blog posts, which we share with you to help you share why did we do things, why do we selected things from the feature portal, and so on, and why do we, for example, not do some of the things. And soon after the conference, we will update this roadmap for Checkmk 2.3 because we wanted you to be the first ones to hear it here at the conference. So that's the Checkmk 2.3 roadmap. That's some of the plans which we have for the future, how we want to plan Checkmk, how we want to involve you. And I think we still have some time for questions now. And I guess I can read them to myself. So give me a second. So we put back all the questions which you had from before, which we have archived. They're back. And the one which had the highest votes is supporting piggyback data from remote hosts. I mean, it's one of the top voted features in the feature portal. Why don't we do it? Yeah. And there are actually some news regarding that feature request. We have one very large environment where we are trying out one solution. Because what we need to do there is a little bit more complicated, and we want to actually make sure before we do anything there that we have really confirmation that what we are doing there really solves the problem. And we have been talking with that customer. They are actually planning to try that out not only in the test environment, but also in the production environment soon. And once we have the feedback from there, then we can actually plan to improve that and build that into and mainline that feature. So what else do we have? We can actually also take questions here from you guys here, if there's anyone. Okay. Will there be possibility to remove multiple rules in one step using checkboxes instead of deleting one after another? At the moment, we don't plan it. I can understand the use case for that. It's something which we could implement. I think that is an example for the feature portal, if that's something which is relevant for not only the person who asked the question, but many more. Please put it on the feature portal, and then we can include it in the next consideration for the roadmap. Appliance. I think the one big news is the update of the, Ralph asked, are there any news about the appliance, the physical and virtual one? So for us, the biggest thing which we want to do there is the Debian update. We didn't plan anything for 2.3 to do some fundamental changes to the appliance. Yeah. Service dependencies. How about the highest feature request service dependencies? Service dependencies are something which, when you come from the Nagios world, are quite familiar. If you have one service, which basically, let's say you have a router, and behind the router you have a couple of servers. If the router goes down, you don't want to get alerts for all the servers behind it. That's a feature which existed in Nagios before. We don't have it in Checkmk right now. We haven't included it in 2.3 for now. We have been discussing it actually since I joined the company. Every year we are discussing, are we doing it or not? But when we have this hard prioritization between all the things which we don't want to do, between effort, because it actually requires quite a lot of effort, and value, so far we have always decided not to do it. But personally, at some point I want to see it as well. But not for 2.3, but maybe we can do it for 2.4. So from Roland we got feedback. Please keep in mind, not every company is able to use Checkmk as software as a service. Some companies are categorized as critters and have to use Checkmk on premise. And I think this is really important. We don't want to do it like some other of the companies out there which are trying to replace the on-premise software with a cloud software. That's really not our plan, because I think there are very different use cases which we understand. There's a use case, especially in monitoring, to really own your data, to really have the control over everything. with very different requirements than what a SaaS solution would do. And for us, that's basically two different things. And we want to address both user groups, because right now we have the solution for the on-premises users, but we don't have a solution for anyone who actually needs a SaaS product. And our goal is to be able to serve both. And our focus is, of course, you, because I mean, the SaaS product is something which we want to build in the future, but the people who are basically making Checkmk possible are the on-premises users. And that's basically for us not something which we want to change. So we plan to basically build two products and maintain two products. So how much time do we have? Is there anyone? Until now, so then I will close it. If you have any further questions, you can reach me via, I'm in the forum quite active. You can also reach me here. I'm here right now, afterwards a little bit further. And just send us an email. They typically end up at my place anyway, at my desk. And therefore, my biggest joy is to talk to users, to understand what you need, and try to find solutions. And therefore, just reach out to me. Thanks very much. And